Welcome to the Great Canadian Leadership Podcast, proudly brought to you by the Great Canadian Training and Consulting Company. Thank you for joining us today in our search for what makes a great communicator. I'm your host, Joel Silverstone, and every episode we'll be speaking with leaders and experts on how they were able to use their communication skills to inspire, create trust, collaboration, and influence others all in a respectful manner. How did they do it? What did they do to get better? How did they adapt? Where did they fail? Listeners and viewers, if you are looking to improve your communication skills and take those steps to being the next great leader in business, you're in the right place. Enjoy the podcast. If you're doing business globally, how do you adapt to the different communication styles, the languages, the cultures, and do assumptions get in the way? Well, in this episode, we've got global business leader Dhimant Patel, and he's going to be sharing his insights and experiences of how he has understood the nuances of language. Dhimant also shares his own journey of the assumptions and unconscious biases that he's had to deal with and how he's managed those emotions, which is a constant path, but has led to some great discoveries in building relationships in business. Dhimant Patel is the president and co-owner of Pantry Shelf Food Corp, which is a family-owned and operated business in Toronto, Canada. Now, previously, he was the chief operating officer at Northern International, and he has led strategic and financial roles at Weston Foods and Rohm and Haas. Dhimant has lived and worked in Europe, India, USA, and Canada, and works extensively with partners globally. This is an enlightening episode on adapting, assumptions, and the communication skills needed to build relationships in business. Dhimant Patel, I am so excited to have this show with you. We are going to be talking about understanding the nuances of language, and you've got some great examples and great anecdotes as a global business leader, all the experiences that you've had, and your own experiences as yourself in being the leader, and some of the assumptions that have gone through. So let's begin, and let's start with your journey as a global business leader. You're traveling around the world. You're working with all kinds of different cultures and nationalities. What have you seen as what did you learn or discover as some of the nuances of language for you?
Hey, Joel, thanks so much. Good to be with you. And I guess the first part is I've been lucky in life to being able to travel the world and be able to see different cultures. And experience things from a very young age in business, and I've really been across Asia, Europe, Latin America, and have had a chance to over the years understand how to adjust the way I communicate with where I am, and there are subtle differences in how you negotiate, and even how you greet people. And even events at dinners and how you conduct yourself in meals, very different across the different parts of the world. And certainly, to the question that you asked, understanding that in parts of Asia, how I communicate, how I bring myself across to the people who I'm meeting with is very different and has been very different from the way I would conduct myself in, say, Europe. Or even in certain parts of Latin America.
Right.
And it took me a while to understand that. In fact, it took me quite a few years to figure that out.
I could imagine. Well, let me ask you this. Let's start with the greeting, because that's where it all starts, right? What have you discovered or what have you learned about that?
Even simple things that I've figured out, it sounds trivial, but if you even learn how to say hello in a foreign language in the country that you're in, those little steps actually go a long way. They know that you don't speak anything beyond hello, and they know that you don't really understand anything that they're saying. But that effort that you make to simply say hello in the right language or to say thank you in their language, that ability to use a few key phrases, especially when you introduce yourself, really helps break the ice in that meeting, in that conversation. There's also a formality in how you present yourself and how you carry yourself in certain parts of the world that doesn't exist in others. Certainly in North America, you can be a lot more casual. and you can
Right.
be a lot more relaxed in how you dress, in the style that you carry yourself with when you're sitting at the table. When I'm in other parts of the world, you tend to be more formal
Right.
in how you position yourself at the table for negotiation and how you dress in the negotiation. And that's not to say that you can't relax it as you get to know the other party,
Yeah.
but it's that first meeting where there is a subtle difference. And honestly, Joel, the other part of it is, and we'll talk about this as we get into it, when you bring in what you think other people's perceptions are of you as a minority with certain name and so on and so forth, that also causes you to take a slightly different approach to how you present yourself and how you speak when you're in the conversation.
Well, this is a great point, and we'll talk more about the assumptions in a few minutes. But let's start with the fact that you make the effort, is what you said, making the effort to say in their language a hello, a thank you, a couple of key phrases. And I think you'll agree with me on this, that's the key to communication, is making you're like the host in these situations, and you're trying to make the other person feel comfortable and create some safety. And so you're demonstrating that you have already made an effort to understand what is important to them, such as using their language.
Absolutely. And again, no one at the table has any misunderstanding that I understand their language, and that's not it at all. There's always a translator. So, for example, I'll have my colleague in Asia who would be with me in the meetings. They would be the translator for whatever conversations are occurring.
Right.
But at least in the very beginning, when, a good example, when you go for a formal dinner in some parts of Asia, there's a certain seating arrangement. And even understanding how that works before you get to the meal, and not just grabbing a chair as perhaps you might in certain parts of North America, knowing that there is a specified spot where you will be sitting, where the president of the company will be sitting, where the next person in authority will be sitting, and how that works around the table. Even understanding those nuances helps you position yourself better for the negotiation, because then they feel like you understand the hierarchy that exists in their culture, in their structure.
Brilliant. You're creating mutual respect so quickly, and to be conscious about it. You're dropping your agenda. I've got something to sell, or this is really important, but you are making that effort as to understand what is important to them. And when you show that kind of respect, it becomes reciprocal, right? And so you're making it easier for yourself. You're setting yourself up for success when you do that.
It very much, and that's a great point, Joel, because that's the other thing that I've learned over time is, for a long time, certainly because we come from the rich West, you can go around the world thinking you've got the best of everything, and you can go around the world and think that you're lucky that I'm here to do business with you, and I've learned over time that if I turn that on its head and actually be grateful for the opportunity to be seeing someone's factory, and to see how proud they are of what they've built and what they've created in their culture, how hard they've worked to build their team, to create this organization. If I give them that respect, you're able to develop relationships that last decades. And I've been lucky because certainly, as I learned from my father before I inherited the company, and I've carried on that tradition, giving that respect to the other side fosters tremendous relationships that I've been lucky that have lasted 20, 30 years.
This is brilliant, because this translates not just about the nuances of language and across the world, but this translates to meeting a small business owner, meeting a CFO, meeting someone who works at a company or organization, and they're proud of their work, and you take the time to be invested in them and say, this is bravo. It's obvious that you're very proud of them. I mean, people love to talk about what they've accomplished.
Right. And to the point that you're making, language to me, there's certainly what you say, but when you're communicating around the world, it's also how you present yourself. That's all part of the language, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people miss that, and they assume it's just the words. And it's one of the reasons I actually make a point of traveling the world. And a lot of people say that, we can get away now without traveling. You can get away now without the face-to-face. And I actually have missed intensely not being able to have those face-to-face interactions with my counterparts in other parts of the world. I've always found that being there next to the person, they see my body language, they see how I react to what they're showing me and what they're presenting to me, carries enormous weight. It's not just the words, it's not just what I type in email.
You have just, Dhimant, you have just exemplified what is communication, which is words are actually just a small part of it. Your tone of voice, your facial expression, your body language says more than what the words say. So it's not what you're saying, but often how you are delivering it, because that's how they are receiving it. Right? They're looking at your face. They're looking at your body language first, and then see if the words actually match.
Exactly right. And even when you write an email, what I've found is I've had to work hard on how you structure and write an email to convey some of that missing body language, to convey some of that missing nuance in how you want to present the question or the statement. And you have to work very hard in writing the email in a way that helps convey some of that cultural sensitivity.
Well, this is really good. I was going to ask you another question, but now I'm really curious about, and I think everyone's really curious because email is so difficult and email has no tone. What is it you think you're putting in there that can add some of that tone to it?
Without getting into specifics, but if there are two parts of the world in which the style of communication is one where you have to provide room for both sides to reach a middle ground, to reach some kind of negotiated compromise, versus other parts of the world where you can be a lot more directive and a lot more, this is what I want. Right. And it's an either yes or no. You have to understand at the beginning who you're working with and who you're communicating and what their style of comfort is, or where their level of comfort is in their style of communication. So when I'm writing an email to colleagues who are in certain parts of the world where that saving face, if you want to call it, is important, then I'm not going to be as directive. I'm not going to be as demanding in saying I must have price X or I must have delivery date Y. It's going to be a lot more of saying there's a possibility for us to win extra business. There's a possibility for us to gain market share if we're able to find a way to achieve a price that works for both of us. If it's possible, we're thinking about a level of pricing in this area here. Please let me know your thoughts on how we can get closer to this if that's capable for your side. And you give them the chance of saying, yes, we would like to gain market share with you. Yes, we would like to work with you. We want to support you as much as we can. We can't necessarily get to where you want to get to, but here's what we can do. And then you find that middle ground, and that helps both sides feel like they've won. Yeah. Certainly when I'm communicating in other parts of the world, it's not so much about who won, who lost. It's just what it is. You're just saying, this is what I want. You're going to say yes or no. Right. This is really what the nuance is, and I guess you're sort of, if we think of it, you're almost like framing it. You're putting a frame around something that's you just really want the price. That's all I want. All I want is a price, but you build this whole world around it so that they actually feel involved, as you say, in the process versus you're demanding something is how it could come across. And you put them in a corner. And so instead, no, we're sitting side by side and looking at this problem together, or we're sitting together and looking at this. I think even whether culturally or not culturally, I think that's just a great way to communicate. Period, because it's about being collaborative as a leader. Thinking about when you want to get something from an employee and say, get me this report. If you took a little bit of extra time and said, hey, we both have a mutual purpose. We want to see this project be successful. When do you think you could have this report done by so that we could show it to the client within a week or so? Yeah, absolutely. And I have numerous examples where, and I've had to learn this the hard way, where because you're tired, because you're overworked,
Right.
you send an email that demands something, and you find that there's no response, and usually they respond within their next day.
Right.
And you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and then you send another email saying, did you get my other email?
Yeah, what's going on?
What's going on? And then you finally end up making a phone call late at night, which is, their daytime, and you speak with the person, and they say, oh, we had to take your email to the senior people, and now we're not quite sure what to do, because the way that I presented it was an absolute. And the poor person on the other side says, I can't deal with this. I have to go to my boss and maybe to my boss's boss to see what we do now.
Right.
And this creates all kinds of consternation inside the other organization.
Yeah.
And you end up not really succeeding in what you wanted in the first place.
The key word there was that speaking in absolutes, right? Because sometimes when we're speaking in absolutes, it can come across as a threat. Because in negotiation they call it, attacking. When you speak in absolutes, you've reached a certain emotional point, even though that wasn't. It was the opposite. You're. It's like midnight. I need this. It's like one more thing before I go to bed, and send it. And in your mind, it's like, please, this is with all. This is all with good wishes and good feeling and goodwill. But all they read is, what's the price?
Yeah, and the other part is, and I've had to dial myself back on this as well. Mm-hmm. Even though I've had relationships with some of these folks that go back 15, 20 years, and you know that there's a friendship there, and you're tempted to write an email as you would to your friends, as you would in a WhatsApp text to your group buddies. Right. You have to be really careful. It's still a business relationship.
Yeah.
And what my counterpart in that part of the world and I talk about over dinner and a couple of beers is very different from me sending an email to his business address email. Mm-hmm. And you make a mistake sometimes of assuming the friendship is there, and you become more casual.
Right.
And you become a little bit less formal in what you write and how you write it, and that's a mistake.
Right.
I've found that you can't assume that because a friendship is there, you're allowed to communicate as you would with a colleague who's a friend in your office or down the street, your neighbor. The formality, that respect still has to be there, because from their side, it's still a business relationship.
I have a question on that. I'm wondering, have you, now that we're sort of more in this virtual world, and we're doing a lot of messaging back and forth, are you finding that people are becoming more casual, that they're becoming less formal in how they're writing? Are you seeing any difference?
Absolutely right. Good. It's a very good point. I receive WhatsApp texts and WeChat texts going into the wee hours in the morning, and I have noticed that my colleagues certainly in Asia have become a lot less formal in what they would write. But to be honest, it's still very structured.
Right.
Right. I won't get messages with them with LOL or smiley faces.
Right.
That stuff doesn't happen. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So even though they're shorter in what they say than they would in an email, just because the medium doesn't really lend itself to long messages, it's still very structured in a way that doesn't necessarily treat me as their friend.
Right.
And I've had a hard time also replying to those messages in a way that doesn't become this long text message or WhatsApp message.
Right.
But saying what I need to say in the right way. And it's actually not easy. I find it very difficult. And I, more often than not, I'll reply to them and say, please send me an email, and we'll review it with the team, and we'll get back to you in the morning.
Yeah. You have to be so much more conscious of what you're going to say. I was, I'm working with someone in Europe, and I'm coaching them, and they just joined sort of the coaching group, and I love how they responded to my email, which was, "Thank you for the warm intro." It's like, what? That is so good. That's classy. I thank you for the warm intro, because I just say, thanks for your email. Thank you for the note, but thank you for the warm intro. So just a couple of words like that absolutely created a smile on my face. Made me feel that this person had actually read what I wrote. And so I think it's about thinking about what are some nice words or key words that you could say that show the formality, but at the same time show that there's a warmth that you're trying to bring in the correspondence.
And I think what you said there is really important. In fact, even early this morning and late last night, an example right here, 500 kilometers down the road where I have an issue, a very significant issue that we're dealing with. And my vendor sent me a pretty tough email last night saying, this is what's going to happen, effective immediately. No lead time, no anything. The individual who owns that company and I are friends. We've had a long relationship, and yet he sent me this very tough email, late at night. First thing this morning, I could have done one of two things. I could have responded to him quite tersely. Right. I could have responded to him in as the customer, and instead I did exactly what your mentee in Europe did, which I said, dear XYZ, thank you kindly for your email. I trust you are keeping well. Not easy days at all. All of this was hard being in COVID. It's even harder getting out of COVID. I understand where you're coming from. Let me call you back later on this morning to see what we do about this, and let's see if we can find some middle ground. He sent me an email back right away and said, I sincerely appreciate your email, and I agree. I will work with you to get to where we need to get to. So instead of this absolute where he said it's take it or leave it, just that little bit of respect and that little bit of taking that deep breath and just pausing for a second before my instinct was to tap out a really nasty email as the customer. To take a step back, keep that respect, keep that communication possible. And that has allowed me with him to have a conversation later on this morning to say, okay, what do we do about this? I understand where you're coming from, but how do we fix it? And Joel, it doesn't matter whether I do that or whether we have issues in Asia or in Latin America or Europe. I think that ability to keep that respect in the tone of the email just keeps the ability to talk and keeps the ability to have the conversation going.
I just dropped the microphone. Brilliant. That is brilliant. I mean, it's the difference between react or respond, right? So you didn't react, which was the emotional, like, how dare he write this? And you take it personally, and then you go, well, no, maybe there's other things going on in his world. And the most important thing that I want out of this, no matter what happens, is I want to keep this relationship alive. And so to keep the relationship alive, I'm going to respond, which is I said, take a deep breath. And I'm going to take the high road, and I'm going to show respect for this person. And they did, and you lowered their temperature when you wrote that.
That's exactly it.
Okay,
I think that's one of the key things. Yep, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, we're going to take a break.
Sounds good.
We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back now and talk about you were talking earlier about the assumptions people have made about you before you even walk into the room or turn on that computer. We're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about your failure ta-da story, which is also about assumptions from a different frame. So let's come back after the break and talk about that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joel.
Hi, I'm Joy Newhold, and we'll be right back to our interview. When I started the Great Canadian Training and Consulting Company in 2002, I never would have imagined that one day we would have a podcast. So first, I want to thank you for listening and share some really exciting information about our organization with you. For years, we have made our live instructor-led software and soft skills training, consulting, and coaching services customizable to meet the unique needs of each client and committed ourselves to a high quality of customer service. This combined to make the learning experience better for the participants and the planning process easier for the organizer. We love helping our clients so much. We also develop many additional free resources to help you along the way, and this podcast is just one of them. At greatcanadiantraining.ca, you will find our free monthly webinars, blog articles, and free downloads covering everything from building better dashboards in Excel to navigating difficult conversations and everything in between. So make sure to join us at greatcanadiantraining.ca. But for now, I better let you get back to the podcast. Please enjoy the rest of the interview.
let's talk now about your own personal journey of the assumptions that people see, and you're spelling your name, Dhimant, Dhimant, Dhimant Patel, but it's really the month?
The month.
And already, like you say, people make assumptions before you've walked into the room, before you've turned on the computer, before you've traveled around the world. And this is something I guess you have been dealing with forever.
Absolutely. Right from grade school, certainly with a name like mine, which is difficult to pronounce and difficult for people even to phonetically get their mouth around. And you can imagine in a business context, people talk about that first 2 seconds of introduction.
Right.
You have to capture the attention of the person you're speaking with. And if at the very beginning you introduce yourself with a name like Dhimant and they look at you, you've already lost. You can see the glazing over their eyes saying, I have no idea how to relate to you. I have no idea how to even say your name.
Right.
And I don't have time to ask you how to say it. I don't have time to repeat it 10 times over. So from a very young age, I've had to understand that my name is complicated, but it took me a long time to reach a level of comfort where the insecurity that I tied to that, I was able to deal with that. And part of that for me was just coming up with a simpler way to say my name.
Right.
But when people don't have a chance to hear you say it in a simplified way, so I use Dhimant as a simplified way of saying my name. But when people first see that name in an email or a meeting request, or they know I'm coming over to see them in Asia or Latin America, whatever it might be, I've internalized that they have a perception of who I am. I've internalized that because of that name, they're going to assume certain things about me. Now, whether that actually is true of that individual or not is separate. I personally feel that.
Right.
And it's taken me a long time to reach a level of comfort with not allowing that to then cause me to think less of myself in the opening parts of a conversation, in the opening parts of a meeting. Right? There's an insecurity that you get because of that. And you build up around yourself ways to cope with that and ways to try and overcome that, or what you think is overcoming that. So, for example, for me, I would always overdress for a meeting so that when I walked into it, I would present myself as someone extremely polished and well manicured, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
So that the visual perception that someone has when they see me, I would think helps them overcome what I think is their perception of who I am.
Right. This is so interesting because you're already telling yourself a story. They're telling themselves a story before you walk in the room, and you're writing a whole script out. You're not just telling yourself a story. You're writing the whole movie out.
Absolutely.
How it's going to play. So this is good because whether it be our name or our background or, or whatever it might be, or I shouldn't be here, for leaders, it's always, I hope people don't know that I have no idea what I'm doing. Right. How have you found your peace with this?
I think a couple of things, and you get to the point where you say, I'm going to be unapologetic for that part of me, and you just reach a level of comfort of saying, that's just the way I am, and that's good. So I'll give you a great example, even for our conversation today.
Yeah.
I had to decide how to dress and how to look for the podcast.
Right.
Do I want people, when they first see me, after they've seen the name and the bio,
right,
am I going to be showing up in a nice double-cuffed shirt with nice cufflinks, or am I just going to be casual with a jacket and a t-shirt?
Right.
And even that conversation internally still occurs.
Sure.
But I allow it to occur. And I allow it to happen, and I allow it to not consume me in how I plan for the rest of my day. I just say, okay, whatever you feel good with, go with it. And off you go. You have to get to the point. I think a little bit of it is also you've had enough business success.
Right.
That your confidence level gets to the point where you are able to let that part of you speak, as opposed to letting your name dictate, or your last name dictate, or the part of the world that you're from dictate who you think other people think you are.
Right. This is really good. It's number one, it's your self-awareness, which is, okay, this is the conversation I'm having. So you're not ignoring it. You're going, okay, I'm still having this conversation, but
Correct.
That's okay.
And it's okay. And you let it happen.
You let it happen.
In my early days, it actually did frame even how I would start meetings. And it even caused me to frame how I would speak and how I would present myself to people. With age, with wisdom, with some success, I don't need to do that as much. And you allow yourself to say, my name is my name. I get that people are going to have a perception of who that person is.
Right.
When I walk in, and the moment I start speaking, I'm not what they think. They may have a perception that I'm from a certain part of the world, that perhaps I have a certain way of speaking, an accent perhaps. And then when you start speaking and they realize, oh, hang on, that's not who I thought it was. And then you just let it go from there.
Right. You're letting yourself come through, where before you might have been maybe hiding by maybe being a bit aggressive or trying to sound really smart. And these are
which
all
is very hard for me.
Yeah. But these are all the things we all do as human beings, is we are trying to hide something, or hide what we feel is maybe a perception about us. And so we
Right.
can come across maybe as aggressive or trying to sound really smart, or we talk a lot, or we fill up the air, when in fact it's, as you realize, what can I be confident about? I can be confident that
Right.
I do have a lot of, business success, business experience. I have something to say. Whatever their perception of me is, that's fine.
It's fine.
I can't control that.
Right. And but it takes time. It's not easy to, and I imagine there are people who have even more complicated names than I do, who probably face the same thing. And I know a lot of folks from my part of the world have taken short form names or even Western names as their business introduction.
Right.
And I'll give you a great example. When I was doing my MBA, one of the professors in one of the early classes, as we were going through, said, "Do you have a nickname?"
Mm.
And I was still insecure enough at the time that I came up with one. And I don't know why I came up with it, but I called myself Dante.
Okay.
Out of nowhere. And so for the MBA, that name stuck. And to this day, all my colleagues and friends from my MBA days know me as that. And I think back to those days, and I wish I'd had the confidence at the time to be able to say to the professor, no, my name is my name.
Yeah.
And I don't mind if you mispronounce it, but this is my name. And it takes time for you to reach that level of comfort, to have the confidence in overcoming some insecurities that come with the cultural biases that you think other people have of you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this. This is really helpful to a lot of people, whether it be, their name or just, I don't feel like I belong at this table. I don't feel like I belong here for whatever reason. I don't have the education. I don't have the experience. I don't have the knowledge. And go, well, hang on. Why are you here? You're here for a reason. So have the confidence that you've gotten where you're at for a reason, and have the confidence to, whether it be your name or your experience or your title, to not, diminish it, distill it, dilute it. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, well, certainly for myself, for a very long time, you had that insecurity, and you're absolutely right. Early in my career, I was promoted fairly rapidly at a fairly young age. And without question, Joel, there are times when you would walk into a room with senior parts of the organization, and you're the youngest guy in the room by a long stretch. And you do have that feeling, do I belong here? What are they all thinking of this young guy who just walked in the room? What is that person who's been here for 25 years and has reached this level, and I've been here for 5 years and I'm at the same level?
Right.
Think of me. And allowing, and there's two ways you can approach that. You can be extremely arrogant,
right,
and say, look how great I am.
Yeah.
I'm in this room and you've been here 20 years and look where I am. Yeah. And I just did 5. You can do it that way.
Right.
Which I did do, and I'm not going to deny it. I did do for a while and had to learn from that.
Okay.
Whereas the other approach you can take is, I'm lucky to be here. I'm actually grateful to be in this room, to have the ability to even converse with some of these people who've had so many more years of experience than I have. And I'm thankful that I'm able to learn from these folks. And what little I have learned, I'll pass on. But I think I have a lot more that I can gain from these folks. And I think if you approach even a business context where you have a meeting, not to be afraid for why you're there, but to approach it from the perspective of saying, wow, I'm really happy to be here. I'm really grateful to be here. And I'm going to see what I can do to present myself not as someone who deserves to be here or who has the right to be here, but as someone who's just grateful to be in this opportunity to be around some really smart people and hear what they have to say.
Such a great perspective, to be grateful for where you're at versus questioning or as you said, be arrogant about it. That gratefulness, right. and as you know, right, the best leaders are the ones who have that humility about them, and will treat everybody that they speak to as an equal, and be curious about that person, and say, tell me what you think, or what's your perspective, right? There's that humility versus, I got here, I got my, I deserve to be here. Let's switch gears here now, if you're ready. We're going to go now to our segment that we like to call Failure. Ta-da! And so this is the moment where we're going to talk about a learning point for you in your career or in your life or in business where maybe it didn't go quite as planned. It was a failure, but we're going to celebrate it because you grew from that and you learned from that. So are you ready to go for it?
Yeah, I got a few.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's choose one if you're ready. If you got something that rings a bell for a failure ta-da moment, and you can say ta-da at the end if you want.
Well, okay. I'll build on what we just talked about,
okay.
That arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, again, I'd been moved up the ranks, perhaps too quickly.
Okay.
And I was given a position. I think I just turned 30 at the time, Joel, maybe not even 30. And I was being flown around Europe in business class. I was heading up teams of people who'd been in the company for 15, 20 years. And freshly out of MBA, only a couple of years. And you think you know everything. And you're trained. Part of the MBA process is you're trained to think that you have all the answers.
Right.
And you walk out with an arrogance, and you walk into meetings with an arrogance. And because you're trying to prove that you have a right to be in that role, that you have a right to have that title, you start assuming or making calculated assumptions about how a meeting is going to go, about how you're going to conduct yourself in a meeting,
right,
and how you're going to negotiate. So what happened was we had the company that I was with at the time, we had patented technology. Our customer in a certain part of Europe was using it and was doing very well with it. But we were the only choice that they had. And I knew that.
Nice.
And we needed to take some pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed that walking into the negotiation, I had thought, and I, naive and arrogant, that the style of communication with this part of the world was a certain way, being very directive, being very blunt. And we walked into the meeting. We had the senior people of this organization there, including the owner, people who are much older than I am. and the meeting started, there was very little niceties that I allowed. And I pretty much jumped into, we're here because this is what I want, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to be.
Right.
There's really not much of a choice. Knowing that I had the patent in our company, knowing that they had no choices. And I presented as done deal, categorical. And around the table, including my colleague who was translating for me, everyone sort of looked at me for a moment.
Oh.
And the other party stood up and actually left.
Ah.
They walked out of the room, and I was sort of bewildered, looking at my colleague,
Yeah.
and my colleague was just very subtly shaking his head, and said, what are you doing? That's not how we do things. That's not, you have to, even though we have all the power, you've just insulted them hugely, because you're not allowed for any part of how negotiation should occur. And again, I had this bias of, I know how this part of the world communicates. I know exactly how to present this, and they will appreciate it that I'm just being direct and forthright. And in fact, it was the exact opposite.
Right.
I had to claw back. So in fact, what I probably could have gotten, had I done it right, I had to go for less. Because when we finally smoothed things over, I was able to talk to the owner, and they came back into the meeting room. I had to walk back, and I had to apologize. I had to make concessions. And that was when I realized I can't have biases. I can't walk into conversations assuming I know exactly how the other person wants me to communicate.
Right. Well, that's, this really brings full circle to speaking about the nuances of language and the effort that one should make, and not assume and not write the script before you go in, and maybe not take the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas too literally as well. But yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's something we can all relate to, that we have made assumptions and maybe gone into more of an attack, or speaking in absolutes, thinking that's the way to do it, when in fact we're not really reading the room.
No, not at all.
Not even taking the time to read the room before, and not putting the effort into it. This has been so lovely. Thank you for ta-da!
Ta-da!
Thank you for sharing that, Dhimant. And I just want to say thank you for your time today. This has been such an insightful episode on the nuances of language. Before we leave, if people want to connect or learn more or reach out to you, what is the best way, Dhimant Patel, for people to reach out to you?
I think my LinkedIn site, I'm there, Dhimant Patel. The other option is, of course, you can email me if you need to have personal conversations about some of the stuff that we talked about, about culture and language and your personal way you present yourself. I'm happy to have an email, Joel, if that works.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's dhimantpatel@gmail.com.
Lovely. I appreciate that. Again, thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing all of these anecdotes about the nuances of language. I think this has been really, really helpful to all of us on how to communicate better and not react, but respond.
It's been great being here, Joel. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. And now it's time for the 3 stars, nos 3 étoiles. These are the 3 takeaways from today's episode that you can start to put into practice. Number 1, it's not just your words. How do you present yourself? Your body language, your facial expression, your tone of voice. When communicating with others, they are looking at those signals to see that actually matches the words you're using. Number 2, mutual respect. Put the effort to be prepared. Who are you going to be speaking with? Emailing. If you're asking for the price, for example, does it need to be direct or does it need to feel collaborative? Learn a few words of the other's language, a hello, a thank you, maybe even a bit about their organization or their culture. That effort shows respect, and that effort will be reciprocated. Number 3, stop writing the script. Assumptions about others and yourself. So before you meet that other person, what are you assuming? And the same goes about yourself. What perception or what story are you telling yourself about how others perceive you? So, What's the next step? Well, if you're not sure where you can apply these 3 stars in business or maybe even in life, try this in the next few days. Respond, don't react. If you get that email or someone says something that causes an emotional trigger, take a breath. Don't hit send. Your first reaction is always going to be emotional. So allow that emotion to subside and then be logical in how you want to respond. Enjoy. Thank you for joining us in our search for what makes a great communicator. If you enjoyed the show, then please leave a rating or review. Even better, subscribe to the Great Canadian Leadership Podcast and make sure you don't miss another episode. Let's stay connected. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at GCT_CompuEase. And if you'd like more information, free resources, or class schedules on everything from software to soft skills training, consulting, or coaching, then go on over to greatcanadiantraining.ca. Thank you, and we will see you next episode.